It began with a dare. My friends, ever the adrenaline junkies, had been buzzing about Hollow Hill for weeks. The stories surrounding it were infamous. A vengeful ghost, a curse that claimed anyone who lingered too long, and the inexplicable disappearances of those who ventured too close. I wasn't one for ghost stories, but something about their wide-eyed retelling piqued my curiosity. "You won't last an hour up there," Jamie teased, smirking. My competitive streak got the better of me. I agreed, but deep down, I couldn't shake the creeping unease that settled in my chest. The night we chose couldn't have been more ominous. Thick clouds smothered the moonlight, and a biting wind howled through the trees. We gathered at the base of Hollow Hill, flashlights in hand and nerves on edge. The forest that led up to the hill was dense, the kind that seemed to swallow sound. Every crunch of leaves underfoot felt like a gunshot in the silence. I could see it in my friend's eyes. This was more than just a joke now. Something about the air here felt wrong, heavy, as if the forest itself didn't want us to proceed. The path grew narrower as we climbed, the towering trees blocking out even the faintest light. It was then that we noticed the silence. No rustling leaves, no chirping crickets, just the oppressive stillness that wrapped around us like a suffocating blanket. "It's too quiet," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. I nodded, gripping my flashlight tighter. The stories we'd laughed off earlier now felt disturbingly real. Was the ghost watching us already? Every shadow seemed alive, every step a potential misstep into the unknown. Halfway up, we stumbled upon strange carvings on the trees, symbols I didn't recognize, etched deep into the bark. They were crude but deliberate, spiraling patterns that seemed to pulse under the beam of my flashlight. "What the hell is this?" Mark muttered, tracing one with his fingers. None of us had an answer, but the markings felt old, ancient even, as though they'd been left by someone, or something, that didn't want us there. As we moved further, the wind began to change. It wasn't natural. It carried a low whisper, almost imperceptible, like voices murmuring just out of reach. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but then Sarah froze. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her eyes wide with fear. I strained my ears, and there it was again, a faint, chilling whisper calling my name. "Turn back," it seemed to say. My pulse quickened, but I forced myself to keep walking. I wasn't about to let fear win. Not yet. We reached a clearing near the top of the hill, where an old crumbling stone stood like a forgotten monument. The air here was colder, biting through my jacket and chilling me to the bone. As we approached, Sarah let out a scream. Her flashlight had caught something, a figure, barely visible, standing at the edge of the clearing. It was gone in an instant, but the damage was done. The fear was palpable now, and even Jamie's bravado seemed to falter. "It's just a shadow," he said, but his voice wavered. I should have turned back then, but curiosity drove me forward. That's when I saw it, a faint glow emanating from behind the stone. My legs felt like lead, but I forced myself closer. There, etched into the rock, was a single word: leave. The glow pulsed with an eerie rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. I reached out to touch it, and the moment my fingers grazed the surface, a piercing scream filled the air. It wasn't human. It was guttural, filled with rage and pain. My flashlight flickered, and I felt a cold hand brush my shoulder. We ran. Logic didn't matter anymore. Every instinct screamed to get off that hill. But the forest seemed different now, the path twisting in ways I didn't recognize. Shadows darted in the corners of my vision, and the whispering voices grew louder, more insistent. "You can't leave her!" They seemed to chant, their tone mocking and cruel. Jamie shouted something, but his words were drowned out by the cacophony. I tripped, my knees hitting the ground hard, and when I looked up, I saw her, the Specter. She was beautiful in a tragic way, her translucent form glowing faintly in the dark. Her eyes were hollow, empty voids that seemed to pull at my soul. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It was as if time had stopped. She raised a hand, pointing towards me, and suddenly my chest felt like it was on fire. The pain was unbearable, as though she was reaching into me, pulling something out. "Why?" I gasped, tears streaming down my face. Mark grabbed my arm, snapping me out of the trance, and we bolted. The Specter didn't follow, but her presence lingered, a cold dread that clung to my skin. The forest seemed to fight us, branches clawing at our clothes and roots tripping our feet. When we finally burst out into the open, I collapsed, gasping for air. My friends looked just as shaken, their faces pale and eyes wide with terror. None of us spoke on the drive home, but we all knew one thing. Hollow Hill wasn't just haunted, it was cursed. The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and creeping paranoia. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every shadow in my room seemed darker, every creak in the house louder. My friends were no better. Jamie, usually the fearless leader, refused to talk about what had happened. Sarah stopped responding to messages altogether, and Mark confided that he was having nightmares. The Specter's hollow eyes haunted us, etched into our minds like a brand. I couldn't escape the lingering chill of her presence. Then, Sarah vanished. One moment she was at home, recovering, and the next, she was gone. Her parents called us, desperate for answers, but what could we say? That a ghost had cursed us, that the whispers hadn't stopped since we left the hill. Her last message to me was chilling. "I think she's here." I reread it 100 times, hoping for a different meaning, but it was clear. The Specter had followed us back, and Sarah was just the beginning. Jamie and I decided to go back to Hollow Hill. It felt insane, suicidal even. But what choice did we have? The Specter wasn't going to stop until we faced her, or until she claimed us all. Mark refused to come. His fear was too great. Armed with flashlights, cameras, and a bundle of sage I bought out of desperation, we retraced our steps to the hill. The forest seemed darker this time, more alive. The air hummed with an unnatural energy, as though the land itself was warning us to leave. As we climbed, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent than before. "You shouldn't have come back," they hissed, their voices overlapping in a sinister chorus. Jamie's flashlight flickered, then died completely. "Keep moving," I urged, though my own legs felt like lead. The carvings on the trees were different now, fresh and bleeding, as though the forest itself was alive. The air grew colder with every step, and I knew we were getting closer to her. When we reached the clearing, she was waiting. The Specter hovered above the stone, her form more solid, more menacing than before. Her hollow eyes locked onto us, and the air seemed to vibrate with her rage. "Why did you disturb me?" Her voice was a low, guttural growl that seemed to echo inside my skull. Jamie froze, his face pale as death. I tried to speak, to explain, but no words came out. She raised her hand, and the ground beneath us trembled. Images flooded my mind, flashes of a life long gone. A woman betrayed by those she trusted, left to die on the hill, her final moments filled with anguish and rage. The Specter's story was clear, burned into my thoughts. She wasn't just haunting Hollow Hill, she was trapped, her torment anchoring her to this cursed place. But her anger didn't excuse the pain she had caused. "What do you want from us?" I managed to choke out. my voice barely audible. She pointed to the stone, her eyes narrowing. "Break the seal," she commanded. I hesitated, unsure of what she meant. Jamie shook his head, muttering, "We can't trust her." But her hollow gaze burned into me, and I knew we had no choice. I knelt by the stone, tracing the glowing carvings with trembling fingers. The symbols pulsed under my touch, their energy humming in the air. "This is the only way," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. The moment I broke the final symbol, a deafening scream erupted from the specter. Her form twisted and shattered, dissipating into the night like smoke. The forest erupted into chaos. The ground shook, trees groaned, and the air filled with an unearthly wail. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, almost comforting. The chill in the air lifted, and for the first time, I felt like I could breathe again. Jamie and I exchanged a look, both of us too stunned to speak. When we returned home, the change was immediate. The shadows that had clung to me were gone, and the whispers had finally fallen silent. Sarah was back, confused but unharmed, with no memory of where she'd been. It was as if the specter's curse had been lifted from all of us. But the experience left its mark. Jamie stopped going on his usual thrill-seeking adventures, and Mark moved away entirely, unable to face the memories of that night. As for me, I'll never set foot near Hollow Hill again. The stories have already started to fade, replaced by new rumors and myths. But I know the truth. The specter may be gone, but the hill itself is still cursed. It's a place that thrives on fear, feeding off the brave or foolish souls who dare to challenge it. So if you ever hear someone mention Hollow Hill, take my advice. Stay far away. No dare is worth what waits for you there. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more chilling tales from Eerie Tales. And remember, some legends are best left alone.